So thank you very much for joining us. We'll do some introductions to start with. My name is Aaron Cassidy. I am Professor of Composition at the University of Huddersfield and Director of the Centre for Research in New Music, or CERNM. I'm very pleased to be joined by two world-renowned composers, outstanding composers, Clara Iannotta and Cassandra Miller. The idea behind these conversations came from Claudia Molitor, from City University in London. And the idea was to bring two people together to talk quite openly and informally about each other's work, without any prompts. We'll see how that conversation goes. Clara is an Italian composer and curator who's based in Berlin. Her music is commissioned and performed by renowned ensembles, soloists, and orchestras, including the Diotima Quartet, Ensemble Intercontemporain, the Jack Quartet, Klangforum Wien, the Neue Vokalsolisten, etc., the Verdier Orchestra. Clara has been a fellow of the Berlin Künstlerprogramm of the DAAD, and has won a number of quite prestigious prizes, including the Siemens Composers Prize and the Hindemith Prize. Clara has also been the artistic director of the Bludenzer Tage Zeitgenössische Musik, which, as it happens, is the festival that gave me my start as a composer about 20 years ago. Cassandra Miller is a dear friend, as well as being an outstanding composer. She's a Canadian composer living in London. She has won, for example, the Jules Léger Prize for Chamber Music, which she has won twice, which is the highest honor for contemporary music in Canada. She's had works performed by the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, the Oslo Philharmonic, Exaudi Vocal Ensemble, the London Sinfonietta Ensemble Plus Minus, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, etc., and has been featured at festivals around the world. It's worth saying as well that Cassandra was a student of ours at Huddersfield, was a student at CERNM before going on to teach at Guildhall in London. It's wonderful to have you both here. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this and giving up some time on your Saturday to have this conversation. I'm going to peel out and mute my microphone and turn off my camera, and the floor is yours. I'll come back in about 45 minutes to wrap things up. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much, Aaron. That was lovely.
Well, nice to meet you, Cassandra.
Yeah, again. Nice to meet you too, finally.
Yeah, it's quite impressive, the fact that actually, well, I think I never met you. I mean, in the sense that I don't even know whether I don't think that we shared any music program.
I think that's right. Yeah.
I don't think that, I mean, I know your music, but so it's quite interesting to virtually meet you finally, I have to say.
Yeah, likewise. I've been a fan of your stuff for a long time, and it's quite extraordinary. It was quite fun to prepare for this and, look for, I had never heard you speak about your music before, and I found a couple of things online where you're speaking about it, and it's quite a pleasure to get more into it. HCMF doing a great thing. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the few nice things about being in this situation, I have to say. Just trying to reach people that you never reached, that maybe otherwise we would have not met, at least not this year. So I am actually pleased to do this.
Yeah. And nice that it has a social focus. I think a lot of people are really trying to figure out what can be done now that's meaningful, because we really do miss seeing each other. And for all of our lives, a lot of things that we got a lot of meaning from is gone. So how to have some, online content, online experience that is meaningful and is somehow meaningful in a different way than like the wonderful vast archive of stuff that's already there, Yeah,
absolutely.
So this is a really sweet endeavor to actually hear people talk, Yeah,
it is true also, because I think that, I mean, except for a few archives, like Darmstadt, etc., but otherwise there are not so many, even just, informal conversations or whatever that I've watched. And so it was nice to see that well, at the beginning, like everybody was like, okay, we are going to do concerts, online concerts, online concerts.
Yeah.
That I have to say that at some point they started to become a tiny bit heavy, at least for me. But to see that also like this kind of conversations are more and more possible to find, that's I think that is actually nice. I mean,
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. Well, people can dip in and dip out and use it when they need to. I know that there was a time when, for me, the online concerts felt really heavy also. And then other times, I watched one a couple days ago, and it just felt like such a breath of fresh air to see something live, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that. So on one side, I've always thought, well, because I'm also a curator, so there are many times that I cannot go to a concert, like a live concert, etc. I do not want to just, whenever I have to curate the festival, I don't want to just choose the composers I know or that I've listened to live, So I need to use internet quite a lot just to do my research. And so I've always been really like, okay, no, there's no problem. I can listen online. That's absolutely no. But then I think that in March, it was my last live concert. And then I didn't go to any concert in September, a live concert. And then when I went in September to this live concert, I just forgot completely how powerful the live event it was, So on this side, I have to say that it's I am looking forward to, let's say, either, I mean, I don't want to say like a complete redo. I mean, of course, I'm just looking forward that this virus goes away or whatever. I'm also looking forward somehow to see how really composers react in the future within the next months to this. I mean, on one side, I mean, if I think about myself, for example, I was really depressed at the beginning because all of a sudden you understand you are completely useless. I mean,
yeah, I know. Yeah,
I felt completely useless, and so I was like, but then also, I mean, and this is something that I say many times also in other conversations with other composers, the fact that, I mean, one thing that really upsets me is the fact that within the past century, let's say, the music has changed so much, and somehow the concert format has stayed for so many centuries. And so knowing that now there has to be somehow a reaction, a creative reaction, or what I'm seeing is that people are trying to figure out how, I mean, let's say that the virus is going to stay with us for much longer. How do we just create, how do we react creatively to this? How can we reach the people that we want to reach? How can we just make the profession that we are doing survive, so that's nice. But at the same time, I have to say that these informal conversations, they are quite pleasing to me, because many times with some composers, whenever I will go to a lecture, although they were interesting, they were never giving me that thing that I was like, whoa. And like the best comments or like ideas that I've had, they were always like at dinner.
Yeah, that's true.
Informal things. So that's one of those few things I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I'm always up to do this kind of things.
Yeah. Well, it's really sweet.
So now you're in London, right?
I'm in London. Yeah. And you were saying,
you're teaching, right?
I'm not teaching anymore. Actually, I'm not teaching this year. I actually, in advance of this, I thought, I haven't updated my website. She's going to think I'm still teaching, but I just need to update my website. No, for 2 years I was helping run the composition department at Guildhall. I was running the undergraduate composition department there and teaching quite a bit. But I gave the position, I passed it on to a magnificent composer, Holly Harding, and she's doing a wonderful job. So it was a life choice, a difficult one, but I quite miss teaching, actually. I mean, I'm a little bit pleased that I haven't had to problem solve this last era, because what a difficulty. But I do miss the I miss the students quite a bit. Well, and the community with the teachers, and yeah, it was a lovely thing. It was a really lovely thing. But I haven't had to do that in lockdown. So I don't have that strange experience of that, trying to make that interpersonal connection, which is so important, work online, which I understand is quite difficult, especially with group classes. People are telling me it's very, very tricky.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I teach privately and I do a few things, but not to group classes. So, no, but that's good. It means that you have more time to compose.
Yeah. No, so basically I'm just composing, and it was interesting because I mean, this is who knows how long I can keep that up for. That's a real privilege. It doesn't come often, but for this year, I'm just composing. And it was interesting because at the time of the lockdown, I was just transitioning out of the job. And so I was also, even before lockdown, I was going through all of that difficulty that a lot of people had after, which is like the busyness of life falls away. And suddenly you realize that it wasn't the busyness that was, like, I realized the busyness isn't what was keeping me from doing what was important to me. There was all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just so horrible to have to confront that.
Yeah.
And a sort of mourning for, a lost time, sort of grieving, and just the struggling with, why are we doing this? I mean, it just sort of changes, and it's a whole struggle. And so actually I was having a really hard time with those things anyway. And then the lockdown happened and people started using words like grieving and mourning. And I was like, oh yeah, thank you. Now I can use these words. And of course it was intensified by that. And the first couple of months were really depressing.
And do you think that, like, your music, because of this transition that you've done, the music that you're writing, or like that you're writing now, for example, that you wrote right after this transition, or like right after you finish the job, etc., will change? Will it affect the kind of music you write?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really nice question. I mean, the hope is that I'll get better at it. Because the more time you have to spend on something theoretically means the better you can get at it, but that's not always true. But it was quite funny because for a while I couldn't compose, and I couldn't get out of bed also. So I was just like moving notes around without feeling like I had much purpose. But then things started to pick up, and in June and July I felt really active, and I felt like everything was really possible. I felt really capable, and I had a couple of projects that went really well and were really easy, strangely easy. And then, but it was just a bit of hubris, then the next thing I worked on, I was like, why the heck is this not? I thought I was like better at this now, and the next piece I wrote, I just really struggled in a way that reminded me of who I was 15 years ago or something. And it was just so difficult to let go of.
But what was the struggle? This really interests me because, for example, for me, it's really, music is full of pain. So it's interesting.
Oh man, I wish I could. That's also a good question. What was the struggle? I think it was, well, on the surface, it was a perfectionism thing. I couldn't make it the piece I wanted. And which seems silly. I mean, I've got technique now for, I've got more than a couple decades of technique. I should be able to do this, and it wasn't enough. Just some pieces don't go the way you want. And, but
maybe you're also trying something else. I mean, I don't know, but it's like, there is, I don't know, it's like sometimes I feel that, and this is also why sometimes writing, it gets almost carried. I mean, is that there is, okay, yes, it comes out of your mind, you put it there, but then it moves, it's alive, like it's this sonic energy or whatever, that it's somehow alive. And sometimes it's so overwhelming that you're trying to direct it and it just like has this life of its own.
Yeah.
And so it's like, but I don't know, it's like, I think that, I don't know, it's like whenever I write a bad piece, somehow it's so much more important than the good pieces.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's like the fact that you understand what's wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that just doesn't work. Or like, this thing that I thought that I was doing is not the way I thought, you know? But now I know how to fix it.
Yeah.
There is this pain that it gives you just to fail, you know, but then you know how to just like build something from there. I don't know, but it's really actually, like, I feel that in new music, in classical, in the community that we do, we don't celebrate failure in a way we should, you know?
Yeah.
Fuck, it's so good. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I can just swear. It's part of my vocabulary.
Fuck. Sorry.
but it's like we should celebrate it. First of all, it means that we are doing something that we didn't do before. Otherwise, we would just copy ourselves the whole time.
Yeah.
I think that, I don't know, it's like, and also I completely feel you when you say, like, you know, I was transitioning from a different kind of life, you know. Yeah. And then the music is affected, of course, because you are writing, so you are the person. We are people before being composers. So there is a change even in the identity, I would assume, because in the moment in which even just your schedule changes, etc., your routine changes, etc., there is a sort of, you're getting lost somewhere, and your identity is affected, I think. But and so you have to rebuild it. But no, I don't know. But I really think that it's but I mean, I had this happened to me actually, not because
I want to ask how,
because I wrote a piece trying to do, I mean, trying to do things that, I mean, maybe like I analyzed the music up to that point, my music up to that point, and I realized a few things, and then I started to just like, okay, what if I actually try to do this? And in the moment I did it, I got so scared, because it's almost like the music that I knew, which kind of corresponds also with the person that I know, which is myself, because really for me, writing is really like this investigation, right? You know, it's like I am looking inside myself. And so in the moment in which it just like falls down, you're like, and so I mean, I couldn't write music for like 11 months.
Really? When was this?
In 2014. And you know what was really funny? That it's amazing. But so the piece that I actually kind of completely made my sonic world fall apart was this piece, this big ensemble piece that I wrote in 2014. And at the premiere, because there was Helmut Lachenmann, and he came to talk to me because they were playing also concertini by him, and we were talking, and the whole festival was dedicated to Nono. And he said to me, you know, Nono used to write to me cards just every now and then, and he was always in a crisis. He couldn't write the whole time. And me, you know, 2014, so I was 31 years old, and I was like, artistic crisis is something so an idiot. I mean, artistic crisis are so important. I think every single artist should have it. And what is really funny, I'm really not making any joke here. Right after, and I said to him that, and he replied to me saying, well, you know, it depends what comes afterwards.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Jesus.
And the fact is that right afterwards, I had this crisis. And I remember that I was writing this piece. I mean, I couldn't really. I mean, I kept just trying to write this piece for 11 months, and somehow I couldn't. But in my mind, I kept saying, like, oh my God, what is going to come after this? What is going to sound like my music? What if it was worth it, this crisis, you know? And it's interesting because actually it got much more difficult to write music.
Really?
So much difficult.
Your music doesn't sound like it was, I mean, there's a lot in it, but it doesn't sound like struggle. It sounds like, yeah, a kind of fluid investigation. I like that you said this investigation thing. Actually, I was, this a bit related to something I wanted to ask about. These, I mean, when I prepared questions, they weren't really questions, but I was wanting to say that with you, I was thinking in advance, like, what do we have that's similar? Because I thought, like, our music sounds so different that this is, you know, if somebody was interviewing us, they'd be like, oh, so your music is so different. And I'm like, well, maybe not, you know. But I was thinking that something that really draws me as a listener to your music, just maybe I'm drawn to it because it's a topic in my music, but it doesn't matter. This isn't about me. And also we approach it in such different ways. But is the physicality that I hear in it, like it's, or that I experience in it. I think this is what I mean to say, that there's moments, let's say when it's, for example, it's not always like this, but it's, for example, there's moments when it's small and focused, and I feel the performer moving, you know? I feel the performer's relationship with their instrument, and I sense it in my body as a listener, you know? And then there's moments, you know, which are not necessarily, it's not just that there's loud and soft moments, but there can be moments then which are overwhelming, for example. And then I feel like a kind of psychological space. Like it's, I feel something in my body that has to do with not with the performer's relationship with their instrument necessarily, although that never goes away, but I just get kind of overwhelmed with a kind of my relationship with me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
And I was just wondering, like, how, when you say that your music is really an investigation of you, like, how does the physicality of the music, is that part of the investigation for you?
Definitely. I mean, you know, it's like, I think that I don't even know exactly how to, well, no, I know how to explain it, but I think that music and my music, like the way I live music, the way I live sound, you know, it's really something that it's, I know that in English this word doesn't exist, bodiness, but to me it's really something that is really, I don't know, there is, when you say the physicality, it's something that you see, you know, and that you just live with your body, etc. You know, I remember that, I mean, I said it several times, maybe it's like there is some experience that I've had when I was a bit younger, that I had to you know, because of personal issues or anyway, personal things that happened to me, I had to talk several times with people that have a lot of problems in just communicating, you know. And I saw that the way you listen just changes with these people, because if you just use your ears, you know, and you just like have a completely normal way of listening, that just doesn't work. And so there is a sort of it's a physical listening. You just listen with your whole body, you just look at them, and that is when you understand them, you know. When the music, when the sound, whatever the communication or whatever, it just doesn't go through one line, but it just affects you fully, you know. And I think that when I experienced that was really interesting, because I was like, I mean, when I realized that my way of listening was changing, I was like, how do I do that in music? You know, how do I make this listening experience change? Or how do I just ask this to the listener? And I mean, this is something that I have been researching, and in any case, it's not really something that I know now. That is absolutely no. But I have to say that, for example, I mean, definitely, like this physicality that you talk about is something that I go after. Okay, that is something that I really like. But I have to say that I'm trying even to push more this. I mean, I don't know if you know this artist, Christine Simkin. I love her so
much. Yeah. I love her stuff. Yeah.
She's my hero.
Yeah, extraordinary.
The way she approaches sound. I mean, she's, for everybody who doesn't know her, she's a sound artist, visual artist who was deaf, who is deaf since birth. She talks a lot about the associations that there are with the sign language and music, the fact that they don't hold meaning almost like, but they hold connections, you know. And the fact that she, when she talks about like reclaiming the ownership of sound, because it's something that it doesn't belong to you, because it's something that it doesn't just belong to the ears, you know. It's not something that passed through this. It's something that you see, you experience throughout your body. And so that is something that, I mean, to me, it speaks so much, you know. And so that is, I mean, I have to say that if I really think about the music that I wrote so far, what I want, and that is actually what I am missing from the online concerts, etc., is that I really like when people come after a concert of mine or a pieces of mine, and they say like, you know, I felt it here in my stomach. I was really uncomfortable, and I was like, fantastic, thank you so much. I mean, you know, it's like I go through hell when I write my pieces. I don't want that you're like, oh, gorgeous. It's like, just feel it. I want that you feel it. But that is interesting. So, because you were saying that this actually is something that you are also interested in. How do you live this physicality that you were talking about?
I'll tell you, but first I had another question for you, and I feel if I don't write it down, my brain will be in two places at once.
In the meanwhile, I get undressed.
Okay, good. Oh shoot, I may have already lost it. I got like 2 or 3.
Oh no.
Yeah.
It's okay. We have like 7 hours here.
Yeah, right on. Oh yeah. Right. Okay, anyway, I got the main one, so this is good. But yeah, Christine Simkin, I mean, she just, I love it. She said that, of course, I mean, I remember so many things that she said. She did a wonderful sound art quasi lecture, quasi sound art event
last year, right?
I didn't see that actually. I saw she was in Cafe Auto a couple of years ago, and she did this fantastic thing on bells, really extraordinary, because she had an apartment that was right next to some extremely loud bells, which she didn't know about at first, but then she started to realize all of these things about how they were, what they were doing to the space around her and the people around her. And so she went on a kind of investigative journey of these bells. Extraordinary. But yeah, something she says very simply is that sound affects her life so much more than it does somebody who can hear very well, which of course it does. I mean, she's constantly looking and watching and feeling for sound in a very purposeful way in order to navigate. So extraordinary person.
Yeah, you know, it's like there is one of my best friends, she actually teaches to deaf people. And once she told me that a small girl asked her, which kind of noise does it make the sun rising?
Oh my God.
And
so cool.
And my friend was like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, it's so huge. It has to make an enormous amount of noise.
Amazing.
And when she told me that, I was like, wow. I mean, you see, you know, it's like, do you see, it's like, and when she was talking about that, she was like, that has to have a sound. That has, it's so impactful, you know, it's something that it has such an enormous effect on your life that it gotta have a sound, you know, it has to have it.
Yeah.
And it has to be huge. Can you imagine? When she told me, I was like, this is one of those things that it's like, it's really like it's with me, you know, close to your bed, basically. One of those things that you really cherish. You're a composer that it shows like, there are things that you don't, sound is not just that.
Yeah.
Music is not just that. No, but let's go back to you, Cassandra.
No, we can, but I have an anecdote which is more interesting about this, which is that I mean, more interesting than me, not more interesting than what we're talking about. I was fortunate enough to be in a workshop in Bergen one week where I was visiting ensemble Bit 20 there, and they had Pauline Oliveros and Iannota come to
wow.
Yeah, just to do a workshop with them for a week. And they also had, there was a sound artist whose name I forget, unfortunately. I'm sorry, I wish I could say it now, but who had made from Paris, who had made these extraordinary instruments that could be played by people who cannot hear. And so all these instruments were in the space, and then we had Pauline and Iannota there to have a workshop all week. And so there was various members of the deaf community from Bergen who were there joining in the workshop. And one of them conducted at the end this amazing piece by Pauline for the ensemble and the members of the community to play together on these amazing instruments. So it was quite an event, but it was interesting because Pauline was only a few months away from the end of her life, so she was a bit tired. And so the workshop was Iannota the whole time. So it was all about dreams and dream sound, and which was wonderful. At the beginning, I was a bit resistant. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to relate to this. But you know, everyone started talking about their dreams, and then you really recognize other people, strangers. You know, you're like, oh, I recognize something of that experience of dreaming that. And of course, we all dreamt with sound in it for the whole week because this was our topic. So we had some really nice things. And the moment that I remember is we were going around the circle and just mentioning if we ever heard sound in our dreams. And the young deaf man who was conducting us said that he didn't exactly hear sounds, but that he heard the sound that his body made. Like, for example, he would in his dreams hear the sound of what his body makes when he's running.
Wow.
We were like, what's that? And he stood up and he demonstrated. He said, you know, like, and it was just like, this is amazing. Of course, our bodies are making sound when we're running. And of course, that's felt in other places besides the ears. And it was just such a lovely and obvious moment. I mean, obvious in retrospect, the kind of thing that you never think of your whole life, and then somebody says it who has a slightly different experience, and you realize there's so much knowledge in that other experience. But
it's like, to me, what is interesting is just that there are all these ways that really, they just ask you basically change the way you listen, you know. And that I mean, wouldn't it be great? Because I have to say that one of the problems that I have with the new music community, and not just with the new music community, but above all with the new music community, because this is this is also our job. So I mean, we are supposed to be able to hear or like listen anyway. And it's just that you don't want to change this. You have to be able to change the way you listen, you know. And I think that, I mean, I don't know, it's like, but I remember that, you know, I mean, some of the composers that I love the most this is exactly what they ask you, you know, to change the way you listen. If I think Elian Radic, you know, you change the way you listen, the way you experience time. But it's all, I mean, because it goes through your ears and through your body, you change the way you listen. You change. It's just completely. Or like I remember when I listened for the when I listened for the first time to Marc-André's music, for example, that I really didn't like at that time, and then he started to show the scores. He would just like play his music without scores, and to me it was sounding just like white noise. But then when he would put in front of me a score, I was like, wait a second, there are all these things that are supposed to happen. Why can't I hear them? And then because I was looking, I was expecting things, you know. I was like, oh wait, something has to happen now. And then, I mean, at some point at the end of the week, I didn't need the score anymore because the way I was listening was just different, you know. And that, it was just so powerful to me, you know, to be able to understand that there is just no one way of listening, and that doesn't, and it doesn't always have to involve your ears. It can involve other senses.
Yeah, and that's a really beautiful example with the Marc-André, because it's the score is like a map for listening or something, and then you learn it. You learn a new way of listening by using this map. Beautiful, absolutely lovely.
No, but wait, I want to know about your.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Cassandra.
Okay. Let's see. I mean, there's a lot of answers to this, but I'm just deciding which answer to say first.
Them all.
Yeah. Okay, good. So the a very simple answer has to do with like when I notate music, and just a simple matter of technique, which is not a word I use lately. I like the word technique, and it's something about being aware all the time of what the musicians may have in their bodies as things they know how to do, you know. So when I notate something, I usually am putting the bar line in a very specific place because I know how somebody moves over the bar line, and this is all part of how things work, even in the most conventional scores. So that's a very simple answer, but the more a lot of my music for many years has been about the voice and what it feels like to sing. So, and that's been a sort of central focus. So even, you know, and then I let's see.
Why the voice?
It's just the voice, yeah. Listen. I mean, some pieces have voice in them, so that but I'm talking about more than that. Sometimes I'm transcribing with using the voice, and sometimes I'm using my own voice in order to compose, and or I'm very inspired by a source material that involves voice. So I was actually, there was a really nice moment in Huddersfield in a composition supervision with my supervisor Bryn Harrison, where I kept talking about melody, and I kept talking because I was really into trying to figure out, like I was always trying to sort of distill melody down into something really iconic. And I had noticed that when I was writing my cello concerto, that I did like lots of experiments to try to figure out how I wanted to use repetition in the piece. And I noticed that repetition was only engaging in the way I wanted for that piece when it had melody. And so I just was really into, there was something about melody that was like, I couldn't figure out what it was for a long time. And I thought maybe it has a sense of a protagonist, of a person or something. But then there was this word going around Huddersfield because of Christine Healy, who's a flute player and academic, who actually was also doing her PhD at the same time. And her research is all about vocality. So what does it mean when somebody says, no, play like you're singing? And yeah, her whole thesis is about that. It actually became, it had a couple sides. There was the side of what does it mean? What is voice? And what is voiceness when you are playing an instrument? But then also on the other side, she did this extraordinary analysis of what happens in masterclasses when usually an older man says this to a young student, and what's being evoked there, and what kind of power dynamics are being evoked by the sort of magical non-specificness of that phrase, play it like you're singing it. So yeah, fantastic piece of writing if you ever get a chance to read it. So, and she also did a conference about vocality called, Vocality, Instrumentality, and there was fantastic lectures. Anyway, so in the middle of this supervision with Bryn, there was a moment where we both realized at the same time in the conversation, like, oh, I'm not talking about melody, I'm talking about vocality. I'm talking about, when I hear a melody, I feel it in my voice, and when I hear somebody sing, I feel it in my body. And when I hear somebody sing, I feel like I know a lot about them because of their voice. So it's like the physical experience of having a voice or a feeling a voice, but also the physical experience of listening to a voice, which either singing or speaking or anything else. And yeah, so then when I realized that this was sort of my topic, especially in relationship to notated music, then I went through a phase where I sort of abandoned notating for about 3 years, and mostly, and then I focused on these collaborative projects, which were around the voice and non-notated collaborative, like process-led working methods, where either myself or a collaborator would sing, and we would use this as sort of the place of creative work. And there was a lot of sort of methods of how to use this as a composing practice. And yeah, it became a topic in itself for those pieces, the voice and how the voice works and what it feels like to sing became like the central investigation of those works. But I think that it continues no matter what I do. If I do something quite different, then actually the last piece didn't have it. And I think it was a bit where it had a different topic and I couldn't connect it to my own physicality. So I think that was part of the problem. But yeah, so it's,
it's super interesting because I've never thought about that. But so, I sing a lot when I compose, in the sense that whenever people ask me like, oh, how do you compose? How do you just, go from here to here? And normally I am one of these composers that is really focused on the second. I don't care what it's in 5 seconds. Not even if I am in bar 1, I am in bar 1. Mm. And they say like, yeah, but how do you go from 1 bar to bar 2? Or from second 1 to second 2? And I'm like, I sing. And I really, it's like, and whenever I can't do that, I just don't feel that the piece is mine,
Oh,
so
wow.
I put normally, if you come to my studio, you see that the piece that I'm writing at the moment is just all over the wall. And then what I do constantly is just like singing the piece, and normally with my partner, I mean, I use him a lot to just to ask him like, oh, what do you think? And whenever I show him the piece, I sing him the piece. But even for orchestra, you know, it's like, but that is when the piece happens, you know, and the only way I can know the piece is using my voice. Although I know that, you know, an orchestra, that's not going to work. But so it's very interesting.
Yeah, I love that you say this. Something I love about your music is how there's a sense of, I mean, what you're talking about, you're relating it to a sense of time and a sense of pacing and how that's sort of rooted in your body. And but I love how in your music the sense of time and pacing isn't exactly the right word, but it relates to this sense of space, which is like you have a space which seems to be, I mean, for me, it actively encourages the kind of listening that you're talking about, that it's like a space for listening with your body and the sound world that you create, the kind of sound language that you build, but overall the pacing of it is what allows this for me, I think. And it's wonderful that you say that you sing it, because I feel like that sort of intuitively brings that together with the physicality of listening that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. But you also do quite a lot of work with time. I mean, I'm not just like, I mean, while I was just like going through your website, etc. I mean, of course, not just the sonic material that you choose, like this relationship with the past that you have, but also the way you just unfold it, etc. Like the pacing that you use, etc. And how do you, because, you know, time for me is also, it's like something that is so interesting, and I'm super happy that you said time and space, because that is exactly for me what, you know, form is, for example. Like time to me is not something unidimensional, so it's really about space. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with this past that I mean, like this the material where you take it from? How do you just change its time, not only because you are composing it, but also because it becomes a new material, so it's going to have for sure a different kind of time, etc. How do you do that? How do you think about that?
It's just such a nice way to think about it. I love what you said there, because it's true. If I take something that exists, or if I use a source material, for example, and I'm putting it in a completely new sense of time, and that probably is the biggest difference between the piece and its source. I never really purposefully thought of it that way. It's lovely, really nice. I think this can be a bit different for each piece. I'm thinking about Bach with the string quartet is probably one that does this most purposefully, you know, where it really stretches out, and the stretching out of it is sort of the topic of the piece. You know, it has this phrase that it repeats over and over again, and it subtracts bits of itself, and you don't really realize that there's a subtraction process until you're getting fairly close to the end, when it's getting quite a bit smaller and therefore sort of slower and more repetitive. I'm not entirely sure how to put words to it. There's something about the process of listening for me, which is I think everybody listens in different ways in a concert. I think this is really unique to each person, and I'm quite a passive listener. So
define passive listener.
Yeah, passive listening. I mean, like, how do I explain? Actually, I'm not sure that's the right word, but it's like Pauline Oliveras talks about a focused listening as in listening to really specific elements and everything else disappears, versus a global listening where you're listening to everything. And I find that when I'm physically present in a concert, the global one is my default state. And I'm usually like physically very relaxed when I'm in a concert. And it's partly because that's just kind of who I am. Like I spend most of my time sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. Like this is my, my body moves really slowly. And this is my favorite thing. So my favorite way to be. So it does mean that I have a lot of patience in a concert. So something that will be comfortable for me because there's not a lot of change in it, or because it goes on for a long time, may be quite uncomfortable for somebody else. I'm not sure, but I like to have patience with something. I like to be in it for a while, and
sorry. No, go for it.
I was just going to say it's more than that. Like, I mean, I sort of say that kind of often just to try to explain something about who I am as a listener. But it's there's something about that combined with, you know, what I'm saying about a vocality and a kind of repetition where I do get hooked on things and I become physically involved. You know, when I can feel it in my body. And there's something really nice for me about this kind of patient listening while being hooked on something. Like it does something to me that's like similar to prayer or something. Like there's something really strong. So it's not just letting something be. It's letting something be that somehow maybe has to do with touch or has to do with physicality somehow.
But just one more question that I have about time related to the source, like the material source that you use. Do you, because also you mentioned Bach, do you, for example, take into account okay, I'll take it to just in a bit broader. So if I Bach to me is like such an inspiration for everything that is form, because it has such a power. I mean, like when I was studying the fugues, for example, the fact that it is the material that allows you, I mean, that shows you its form, you know, his time. If I take his fugues, I mean, of course, I mean, there is an academic form that is the fugue, but he never does it. Why not? Because the material doesn't need that. It's the material that is, because of the material he uses, that is the form, that is the time he's going to use, which is absolutely beautiful. Because I have to say that whenever, for example, I hear nowadays closed forms, you know, like ABA, etc., and then I listen to it and I'm like, I wonder how this kind of material, for example, led you to this kind of form. And one of the weak points that I think my music has, for example, and that I am trying to work on, is trying to understand the material that I'm using, because I think that sometimes the time, the space that I give to this material is the wrong one. You know, I didn't get it fully. So. I don't know. But so I was just wondering, whenever you take a material, for example, I mean, of course you're going to work on, but do you take the material per se from its sonic qualities or whatever, or do you take like the form also, like its time? And how do you just relate to that? Because I mean, I never do quotation. Just once happened that I took like sonic material from someone else, actually from Bach, but that because they asked me, I would have never. And so this is something that, but it's something that is very interesting to me. It's like, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the fact that sonic material had its time?
Has its time, yeah. Interestingly, it kind of doesn't matter if we're talking about somebody else's material or our own. There's a similar question there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, what is the time of that material, and how do we compose with the time of that material? Let me think if I this is such an intelligent question. Let me try to do it some justice. Yeah, okay, I think I know how to answer this. Again, a simple answer and a not so simple answer. The simple answer is when I'm looking to write a piece, for example, when I wrote the cello concerto and I'm looking to write a piece for, that involves an orchestra, and I know it's going to be fairly long, and I know that it's going to involve some repetition. And so I was looking for something that had the kind of melodic touch that would allow the repetition and the form to do something. I didn't know what to do but that it had some power in it. So there's like a simple thing of like, okay, I'm actually looking for the material that has a certain quality that allows me to do something with it, to stretch it out or to layer it, and it has a certain quality or something. So that's the very simple answer. But the more real answer, the more honest one, has to do with a kind of physical process, and it links together what we're talking about. So the best way to describe it is to talk about one of the first pieces I made with Juliet Fraser. So we have various pieces we've made together. They're all called Tracery. And so one of the first ones we made was called Tracery Lazy Rocking. So how it worked was that she listened to source material in headphones. And in this case, it was one of the movements from Ben Johnston's string quartet, and that movement is called Lazy Rocking. And we have something that's developed in that project and in various other things I do, which I now call automatic singing, which is that to use a body scan meditation to try to not focus on the results of what you're singing. So she's listening in headphones fairly loud, so she doesn't hear herself so well, and doing a meditation and just singing along, just sort of automatically singing, not trying to trace any particular line, but just whatever happens. And then we recorded that. And then the sort of method for this kind of way of working is that I would take that recording and make a canon from it, at 6 seconds or whatever, 8 layers at 6 seconds of her own voice. And then I gave that to her. It needs to be fairly thick so she doesn't hear herself so much. And then she would, and also there's some nice repetition that comes in if you sing along to a canon. So she would sing along to that, and we would record that. And then we would do that several times. So, but the interesting thing is that every time she did it, it became more and more like a sigh and less like a melisma, So it started like a melisma and then would get sort of stretched out, but it had this physicality in her breath. The reason it was getting stretched out was because of how she was physically with it. So the great thing about this is that we did this, say 7 or 8 times. So we had like 7 or 8 versions of her singing along, which were changing and transforming more and more towards this sort of meditative sigh. And almost until vocalizing and breathing were just the same thing. And then a part of the meditating was that she was sort of asking her body to have the impulse to sing before she would even start to sing. And we arrived at doing it, one more time, and she didn't sing. Her body never gave her the impulse to sing. So we're like, hey, this is how this process finishes. We now have a track where you're just breathing, and we're done. And it was so this is the really long answer to say that was a way to try to find a physical process, that one of the things that physical process did was find the limits of the form of that original material, you know, and the limits were found in the body. The body had the answers, which is very similar to what you say you're doing when you are singing something as you're writing it. You know, you're finding the dimensions of that gesture, and you're finding the answers within your own body. And I feel like we do that when we listen to things, you know, when we're listening back, you know, even when I'm writing something, like when I was writing about Bach, and it was like all on the computer. So I just would press play and it would be this stupid MIDI sound, which is really not physical. But as a listener, I would know when I was inside it or when I was outside of it. And I, you know, I've been doing this long enough to know how it's different on MIDI than in real life. So I think, you know, as composers, as listeners, we do listen with our full body, and we do know what that's like. And we do know that influences our intuition, but also, you know, we're tracking how our body's feeling. And if something isn't right, or if we're feeling uncomfortable, then we can go towards that, or against it if the piece needs to go against it. But, you know, we know how to find these things because of how our body is reacting, I think.
But it's nice that you, I see Aaron.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to just give you, I'm going to cue you the end, Aaron.
In a couple hours. We're not done yet, Aaron.
No, but this is super interesting. You know why? Because, I mean, if I take this piece as example, like you were saying, the fact that Juliet, she was like, I'm not singing because it's like, almost like the fact that she felt that the potential, or like the time or the space of this material was done, you know? And that is unbelievable because, for example, to me, it's like there is no ending, you know? So that is why I was like, Aaron, I give it to you. but it's really true. It's like in my music, normally, so now it has been a couple of years that I do that. I don't even choose an ending.
Yeah.
I just close it. And I always ask people, I don't want any diminuendo, please. Yeah. Okay. Just cut it. I don't care, because that is not, it's just, and how to die is so difficult to me. But this is actually beautiful. That is like, that you were like, that called it. You know? So.
I love that your music when it just ends, because it's created such a wonderful space for listening that I don't want it to end. I don't want to be taken out of that space. And it on one sense, we can get the sense that like the piece ended, but it could have continued, and it sort of is always going on, even when we're not in the concert hall. But also we get the sense like, okay, we can now be like this with each other, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That is just about the perfect possible ending. It's pretty extraordinary. I mean, I debated whether or not to say this in the introduction, but I'll say it now. One of the original prompts for these conversations, when Claudia Molitor proposed it to me and to Graham at the festival, was the idea of bringing two people who wouldn't necessarily be put in the same place at the same time. You mentioned that you haven't been programmed on the same concert before, and haven't had a conversation before, but somehow that something special might come out of that, and that has certainly happened. So kudos to Claudia for the idea. I wanted to say, I mean, one of the reasons why I selected the two of you for this conversation is because I've been in your presence in a number of occasions where you have talked about your work, or talked about the process of listening, or talked about the process of writing in such candid and honest ways. And I really appreciate that you've done that again here, and done it in a way that's shared for an audience. And I guess one of the lovely things about Zoom, I mean, I know that you talked at the beginning about the shortcomings, but it's possible to do something like this, right? To bring people together from various corners of the world and be in the same place at the same time, and talk about things that maybe we wouldn't otherwise get to talk about. So Clara Iannotta and Cassandra Miller, thank you so much. That was an absolutely beautiful conversation. And I was really enjoying just getting to sit and listen along, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with the hcmf audience in a few days. Thank you both
so much.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Oh, lovely. Thank you, Clara.